Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into tonight's journey, I'd love it if you could hit that like button if you're enjoying what we're exploring together, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm always fascinated to see our global community connecting through these ancient stories. Now settle in, maybe dim those lights, and let's travel back to a world that would challenge everything you think you know about survival. Picture this. You've just woken up 3.1 million years ago in the heart of East Africa. The sun is blazing overhead, but you're not reaching for sunscreen or a hat. Those don't exist yet. You're not even reaching for clothes, because those don't exist either. You're standing completely exposed in a landscape that's trying to kill you in ways modern humans can barely comprehend. Congratulations, you've just experienced your first morning as one of our earliest ancestors. And here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Not only did they survive this brutal world without a single piece of clothing, they actually thrived in it. They developed protection strategies so effective that they laid the foundation for everything we wear today. But here's what's really incredible. The story of how our ancestors first protected themselves isn't just about survival. It's about the spark of human ingenuity that would eventually lead to haute couture, spacesuits, and bulletproof vests. Every piece of fabric in your closet right now can trace its lineage back to this moment in time when naked, vulnerable primates figured out how to shield themselves from a world that wanted them dead. Tonight, we're diving deep into the origins of clothing and protection, and I'm warning you right now, this isn't the sanitized version you learned in school. This is raw, this is real, and this is absolutely fascinating. We're going to explore how creatures with no natural armor, no thick fur, and no built-in weapons managed to not just survive, but eventually dominate the planet. The morning air is thick with humidity, and the temperature is already climbing toward what would feel like a furnace to modern skin. But you're not modern. You're Lucy's cousin, part of a species called Australopithecus afarensis. Your brain is about the size of a chimpanzee's, but something remarkable is happening inside that skull, something that will change everything. You look around at your surroundings with eyes that are learning to see danger everywhere. The African savanna stretches endlessly in all directions, dotted with acacia trees that provide precious little shade. In the distance, you can see the silhouettes of predators that make today's lions look like house cats. Saber-toothed cats with canines the length of kitchen knives. Giant hyenas that could crush elephant bones with their jaws. And somewhere out there, early leopards that have already figured out that creatures like you make excellent prey. Your skin, exposed and vulnerable, is your first line of defense, but it's also your greatest weakness. Without the thick hide of a rhinoceros or the protective fur of our primate cousins, every thorn becomes a potential death sentence through infection. Every scrape could introduce bacteria that your primitive immune system can't handle. The sun beats down with an intensity that would hospitalize a modern human in hours, yet you have no choice but to endure it. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Your ancestors didn't just endure these conditions. They adapted to them in ways that would revolutionize survival itself. The human body became the first piece of protective equipment our species ever developed. Our skin learned to sweat more efficiently than any other mammal on the planet. While other animals panted and sought shade, we developed the ability to cool ourselves through perspiration, allowing us to hunt and travel during the hottest parts of the day when other predators were forced to rest. This wasn't just a biological adaptation. It was the beginning of strategic thinking. Early humans realized they could use the environment's hostility to their advantage. When the big cats were sleeping off the midday heat, our ancestors were moving, hunting, and exploring. We turned our apparent weakness into our greatest strength. Now imagine you're walking across this ancient landscape, your bare feet navigating terrain that would shred modern hiking boots. Every step is calculated, every footfall deliberate. You're not just walking, you're reading the ground like a book, sharp rocks that could slice tendons, thorns that could puncture arteries, hidden burrows that house venomous snakes. Your feet have developed thick calluses that serve as natural shoes, but even those have their limits. And then you notice something that changes everything. A fallen animal, recently killed by one of those massive predators we mentioned. But the predator is gone, and what remains is opportunity. Not just meat for sustenance, but something far more revolutionary: hide, fur. The raw materials for humanity's first fashion statement. This moment, right here, is where clothing begins. Not with a fashion designer or a textile factory, but with a desperate, brilliant ancestor looking at a dead animal and seeing possibility where others saw only decay. The leap from using animal parts for food to using them for protection was a cognitive revolution that separated us from every other species on the planet. But creating that first piece of protective gear wasn't as simple as draping a hide over your shoulders. Remember, these early humans didn't have knives, needles, or any of the tools we take for granted. They had stones, sticks, and their own ingenuity. The process of turning animal hide into usable protection required innovation at every step. First, they had to figure out how to separate the hide from the carcass without metal tools. Sharp stones became primitive knives, carefully chipped and shaped to create cutting edges. The process was painstaking and dangerous. One wrong move could result in a gash that would likely prove fatal in an environment with no medical care. Once the hide was removed, the real challenge began. Raw animal skin doesn't stay flexible for long. Without proper treatment, it becomes stiff and brittle, cracking and falling apart within days. Our ancestors had to discover the principles of leather making through pure trial and error. They learned that certain plants contained tannins that could preserve hide. They discovered that animal brains contained oils that kept leather supple. These weren't accidental discoveries. They were the result of systematic experimentation by minds that were rapidly evolving to solve complex problems. The first successful piece of protective clothing was likely nothing more than a roughly scraped hide thrown over the shoulders. But that simple act represented a revolutionary moment in human evolution. For the first time in Earth's history, a creature had deliberately modified its environment to protect itself from that same environment. We weren't just adapting to the world around us, we were beginning to reshape it. Think about what this meant for survival. That piece of hide provided protection from thorns during long-distance travel. It offered insulation during cold nights when temperatures could drop dramatically. Most importantly, it gave psychological protection. The confidence that comes from having a barrier between your vulnerable skin and a hostile world. But protection wasn't just about physical barriers. Our ancestors were developing other strategies that would prove equally revolutionary. They were learning to read weather patterns, to predict when storms would hit and seek shelter accordingly. They were discovering that certain locations offered natural protection from wind and rain. Cave mouths, rock overhangs, dense thickets that could serve as temporary shelters. The development of fire was another crucial element in this protection revolution. While other species fled from wildfires, humans learned to harness and control flame. Fire provided warmth during cold nights, extending the range of habitable territory. It offered protection from nocturnal predators who instinctively feared the dancing flames. And it allowed for the cooking of food, making nutrients more accessible and reducing the risk of foodborne illness. But perhaps most importantly, fire became humanity's first group protection system. A campfire wasn't just a tool for individuals. It was a rallying point for entire communities. Families could gather around the flames, sharing warmth, food, and safety. The person tending the fire became the guardian of the group's survival. This was the beginning of specialized roles within human society, the first step toward the complex civilizations that would follow. The social aspects of protection were just as important as the physical ones. Early human groups developed communication systems that allowed them to warn each other of approaching danger. Different calls for different types of threats. A sharp cry for aerial predators. A low whistle for ground-based hunters. These weren't just random sounds. They were the beginnings of language, developed specifically to enhance group survival. Cooperation became our species' most powerful protective mechanism. While individual humans were vulnerable, groups of humans working together could face down predators that would easily kill any single person. They learned to hunt in coordinated packs, using primitive weapons and clever tactics to bring down animals many times their size. The meat from these hunts didn't just provide nutrition. The bones became tools, the sinew became cordage, and the hides became protection. As we move deeper into this ancient world, we start to see the emergence of what we might recognize as primitive clothing. Those initial draped hides evolved into more sophisticated garments. Our ancestors learned to tie hides around their waists, creating the first loincloths. They discovered how to wrap smaller pieces around their feet, producing primitive shoes that offered protection from sharp rocks and thorns. The needle, when it finally appeared much later in human history, would revolutionize clothing production. But long before needles existed, our ancestors were finding ways to join pieces of hide together. They used sharp thorns as primitive fasteners. They learned to cut thin strips of leather that could be used as ties and bindings. They discovered that wet sinew would shrink as it dried, creating tight connections between separate pieces of material. Each innovation built upon the previous ones, creating an accelerating cycle of technological development. Better tools led to better clothing. Better clothing allowed access to harsher environments. Harsher environments demanded even better tools and clothing. This feedback loop would eventually drive human expansion across the entire planet, from the frozen Arctic to scorching deserts. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Back in that African landscape 3.1 million years ago, our ancestors were still taking those first crucial steps toward becoming the clothed, protected, technologically advanced species we are today. Every morning brought new challenges that demanded creative solutions. Every solution became part of humanity's growing toolkit for survival. The story of clothing and protection isn't just about fabric and fashion. It's about the moment our species decided we wouldn't be victims of our environment, we would be its masters. The sun is now directly overhead, and you're learning one of humanity's most important lessons about protection: timing. Your ancestors discovered that survival wasn't just about having the right tools or the toughest hide. It was about understanding when to move and when to stay still, when to hunt and when to hide, when to fight and when to flee. During the scorching midday hours, while predators sought shade and water sources became death traps crowded with dangerous animals, early humans found their opportunity. This was when they could safely approach those precious waterholes, when they could scavenge from recent kills without competing with massive carnivores, when they could gather plant materials needed for their growing arsenal of protective innovations. Your skin is glistening with sweat, but this isn't a sign of weakness. It's evidence of one of evolution's most brilliant protective adaptations. While other mammals were limited by their inability to cool themselves efficiently, humans could maintain activity levels that would kill other species. We became persistence hunters, chasing prey across vast distances until exhaustion brought them down. Our superior cooling system wasn't just about comfort. It was about expanding our hunting range and our territorial control. But sweating created its own challenges. The salt loss from extended perspiration could prove fatal without replacement. Our ancestors learned to seek out natural salt deposits, to identify plants with high mineral content, and to value certain animal parts specifically for their salt content. They were unknowingly developing the first sports drinks, consuming mixtures of water, plant extracts, and animal blood that replenished essential electrolytes. The afternoon brings different dangers. As the temperature begins to drop slightly, predators start stirring from their midday rest. This is when early humans needed their most sophisticated protection strategies. Moving in coordinated groups, they developed formation patterns that maximize safety. The strongest and most experienced individuals took positions on the perimeter, while the vulnerable members of the group remained protected in the center. These weren't random arrangements. Archaeological evidence suggests that early human groups had specific roles and positions based on individual capabilities. The keen-eyed sentries, who could spot danger from great distances. The trackers, who could read signs in the landscape that others missed. The toolmakers, who could rapidly craft weapons when threats emerged. Each person's unique skills became part of the group's collective protective system. As you move through this ancient landscape, you notice something remarkable happening around you. Your group isn't just reacting to the environment anymore, they're beginning to modify it. Small changes at first, but changes nonetheless. They're clearing thorny vegetation from frequently used paths. They're stacking stones to create windbreaks near favored resting spots. They're even beginning to dig shallow depressions that collect rainwater, ensuring reliable hydration sources. This is the birth of environmental engineering. Humans weren't just adapting to their surroundings. They were adapting their surroundings to themselves. Every modification made the landscape a little safer, a little more hospitable, a little more protective. These early infrastructure projects would eventually evolve into cities, fortresses, and climate-controlled buildings, but they began with simple stone piles and cleared pathways. The development of tools accelerated this environmental modification. Those sharp stones we mentioned earlier were just the beginning. Our ancestors learned to shape bone into needles, to split wood into spears, to weave plant fibers into cordage. Each new tool opened up possibilities for better protection. Sharper cutting implements meant more precise hide preparation. Stronger cordage allowed for more secure clothing fasteners. Better spears provided effective defense against predators. But perhaps the most important tool development was the creation of carrying devices. Early humans realized that mobility was crucial for survival, but so was the ability to transport protective equipment and supplies. They developed the first bags from animal bladders and woven plant materials. They created carrying frames from branches and sinew. These innovations allowed groups to maintain their nomadic lifestyle while accumulating an increasingly sophisticated array of protective gear. The psychology of protection was evolving alongside the physical tools. Our ancestors were developing what we might recognize as the first fashion consciousness. Different groups began creating distinctive styles of clothing and decoration that identified tribal membership. This wasn't vanity. It was a survival mechanism that allowed individuals to quickly identify friend from foe at a distance. Decorative elements served protective functions beyond mere identification. Bright colors and patterns could intimidate rivals or prey animals. Certain designs might signal an individual's role within the group, their level of experience, or their access to specific resources. The first jewelry likely served practical purposes before aesthetic ones, holding clothing in place or providing readily accessible tools. As evening approaches, your group begins preparing for what is perhaps the most vulnerable time of day. Darkness brings its own unique set of challenges. Predators that hunt by night, temperature drops that could prove fatal, and the psychological terror of being unable to see approaching threats. This is when early humans' protective innovations became most crucial. The evening routine reveals the complexity of early human protection strategies. Fire preparation becomes the central activity, but it's far more sophisticated than simply lighting a flame. Your ancestors have learned to select specific types of wood that burn longer and produce less smoke. They've discovered that certain plants, when added to the fire, repel biting insects. They've developed techniques for banking coals that will provide warmth through the night without requiring constant attention. The positioning of sleeping areas shows remarkable strategic thinking. Individuals are arranged so that the lightest sleepers are positioned where they can detect approaching threats. Natural barriers, like rocks or fallen logs, are incorporated into defensive perimeters. Escape routes are identified and kept clear of obstacles. Even in sleep, protection remains the primary concern. Shelter construction becomes increasingly important as groups begin staying in favorable locations for extended periods. The first architectural efforts weren't about creating permanent structures, but about modifying natural shelters for better protection, adding walls of stacked stones to cave entrances to create wind barriers, weaving branches together to create overhead protection from rain, building raised sleeping platforms to avoid ground moisture and crawling predators. These early construction projects required unprecedented cooperation and planning. Multiple individuals had to coordinate their efforts, sharing labor and materials to create structures that benefited the entire group. This collaboration fostered the development of communication skills, leadership hierarchies, and resource allocation systems that would become foundations of human civilization. The night also brought opportunities for innovation that weren't available during daylight hours. Gathered around the fire, with immediate survival needs temporarily met, early humans had time for experimentation and creativity. They could work on improving their tools, refining their clothing construction techniques, and developing new protective strategies. The evening hours became humanity's first research and development periods. Storytelling likely emerged during these nighttime gatherings as well, serving important protective functions beyond entertainment. Oral traditions preserved crucial survival information across generations. Stories about dangerous animals, effective hunting techniques, and successful protective strategies ensured that hard-won knowledge wasn't lost when experienced group members died. These tales became humanity's first survival manuals, encoded in memorable narratives that could be passed down through countless generations. The development of protective clothing accelerated during this period, as humans gained more experience working with animal hides and plant materials. They learned to combine different types of materials for specific protective functions. Tough outer layers for durability, soft inner layers for comfort, waterproof materials for rain protection. The first composite garments were being born. Threading and weaving techniques became increasingly sophisticated. What began as simple knotting and binding evolved into complex interlacing patterns that created stronger, more flexible materials. Our ancestors discovered that certain plant fibers could be twisted together to create cordage stronger than any individual strand. This principle of collective strength would become a recurring theme in human protective technology. The social aspects of clothing production created some of humanity's first specialized labor divisions. Individuals with particular skills in hide preparation, fiber processing, or garment construction began focusing their efforts on these activities while others provided food and security. This specialization led to higher quality protective gear and more efficient production methods. Trade relationships began developing between different groups as specialized knowledge spread. One group might excel at creating waterproof materials, while another developed superior cutting tools. Exchange systems emerged that allowed access to protective technologies beyond what any single group could produce independently. These early trade networks would eventually span continents, but they began with simple exchanges of survival gear between neighboring tribes. Quality control became important as protective equipment became more sophisticated. A poorly made garment wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be fatal. Standards developed for material selection, construction techniques, and durability testing. Our ancestors learned to stress test their protective gear before depending on it in life-threatening situations. The seasonal cycle brought new challenges that drove further innovation in protective clothing. Summer gear needed to provide sun protection while allowing cooling airflow. Winter clothing required maximum insulation while maintaining mobility. Rainy season garments had to shed water while remaining breathable. Each season demanded different solutions, leading to the development of specialized clothing for specific conditions. As we witness these remarkable developments unfolding around our ancient campfire, We're seeing the birth of an idea that would eventually reshape the entire planet. The concept that humans don't have to accept the world as they find it. They can change it, improve it, and adapt it to their needs. Every piece of protective equipment developed by these early humans contained the seed of future innovations. That first draped hide would evolve into tailored clothing. Those primitive shelters would become architectural marvels. The basic tools would develop into complex manufacturing systems. But more importantly, the mindset being developed here, the refusal to simply endure hardship when creativity could overcome it, would become humanity's defining characteristic. We were becoming the species that turns problems into solutions, obstacles into opportunities, and challenges into innovations. Tomorrow will bring new dangers, new challenges, and new opportunities for protective innovation. But tonight, gathered around the fire with the first clothing humanity ever created draped across their shoulders, our ancestors have taken the crucial first steps toward becoming the masters of their environment rather than its victims. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across faces that are learning to dream of tomorrow. But dawn is still hours away, and the real work of survival continues even in sleep. Your ancestors have discovered that protection doesn't end when consciousness fades. The most vulnerable moments require the most sophisticated defenses. Watch how they arrange themselves for the night. This isn't random. Every position has been calculated through generations of trial and error, paid for in blood by those who chose poorly. The eldest members of the group sleep closest to the fire, their bodies requiring extra warmth to maintain core temperature through the cold hours before sunrise. But they're also positioned where their experience can guide the group if danger approaches. A lifetime of surviving nights like this has taught them to distinguish between the normal sounds of darkness and the subtle warnings that death is prowling nearby. The youngest and strongest take positions on the perimeter, their acute hearing and quick reflexes serving as the group's early warning system. But even their placement reveals sophisticated strategic thinking. They're not spread evenly around the camp. Instead, they're concentrated where the terrain offers the best approaches for predators. Natural choke points where a single alert guard can monitor multiple threat vectors. Between these defensive rings, the most vulnerable members rest with surprising security. Pregnant women, small children, and the injured or sick are surrounded by layers of protection that would make modern military planners proud. This formation didn't emerge overnight. It represents thousands of years of refinement, each adjustment paid for by the loss of those who trusted inferior arrangements. But physical positioning is only part of the nighttime protection strategy. Your ancestors have learned to weaponize sleep itself. Different individuals maintain different sleep cycles, ensuring that someone is always approaching full alertness, while others rest deeply. This rotation system means the group never faces the darkness completely defenseless, never experiences that terrifying moment when every guardian is lost in dreams. The fire itself has become a sophisticated protective technology. What appears to be a simple flame is actually a carefully engineered system designed to maximize safety while conserving fuel. The wood has been arranged to burn steadily through the night without requiring constant attention. Specific types of timber have been selected for their burning characteristics. Green wood that smolders and produces smoke to repel insects. Dry hardwood that burns hot and bright to deter larger predators. Resinous branches that crackle and pop, creating irregular sounds that mask the group's movements and breathing. Around the fire's perimeter, your ancestors have created what we might recognize as humanity's first security system. Carefully placed objects that will make noise if disturbed. Dried leaves that crackle underfoot. Loose stones that shift and rattle when stepped on. Thorny branches positioned to channel any approaching threat into predetermined kill zones where defenders can focus their response. These early warning systems reveal remarkable understanding of predator behavior. Your ancestors know that most dangerous animals approach from downwind, using scent to locate prey. So the defensive perimeter is designed with wind patterns in mind, creating obstacles that force attackers to reveal themselves before reaching striking distance. They understand that nocturnal hunters rely on stealth, so the noisemakers are positioned to destroy that advantage. The psychological aspects of nighttime protection are equally sophisticated. The fire provides more than physical warmth and light. It creates a sense of controlled space in the vast darkness, a bubble of human dominance in a world that belongs to creatures far more dangerous than ourselves. The dancing flames mesmerize and calm, reducing the anxiety that could lead to poor decision-making during crisis moments. But perhaps most importantly, the fire serves as a communication hub. The light allows for silent signaling between guards, hand gestures and facial expressions that can convey complex information without alerting nearby predators to the group's awareness of their presence. This visual communication system is humanity's first tactical coordination network, allowing defensive responses to be organized and executed with military precision. As the night deepens, you begin to understand that protection for early humans wasn't just about surviving until morning. It was about maintaining the group's fighting effectiveness for the next day's challenges. Sleep quality determined hunting success. Rest patterns affected tool-making precision. Recovery time influenced travel distances and foraging efficiency. Your ancestors discovered that different types of protective gear were needed for different stages of sleep. Loose, breathable coverings for the early evening when body temperature remained high. Tighter, more insulating wraps for the pre-dawn hours when core temperature naturally dropped to dangerous levels. Specialized bedding materials that provided cushioning while allowing quick movement if threats emerged. The development of pillows and mattresses began during this period, though they bore little resemblance to modern comfort items. Bundles of grass and leaves carefully selected for their insulating properties. Animal bladders filled with air or water to provide cushioning for pressure points. Stones heated by the fire and wrapped in hide to provide localized warmth for aching joints and muscles. These comfort innovations weren't luxuries. They were essential protective equipment that determined whether group members would wake refreshed and capable or stiff and vulnerable. A hunter who spent the night on cold, hard ground couldn't track prey effectively the next day. A toolmaker whose hands were cramped from poor sleeping position couldn't craft the precision implements that kept the group alive. The social dynamics of nighttime protection created some of humanity's first formal leadership structures. Someone had to decide who slept where, who stood watch when, and how resources like fire-warmed stones were allocated. These decisions couldn't be made by committee during crisis moments. Clear chains of command evolved, with experienced individuals taking responsibility for group safety during the vulnerable sleeping hours. But leadership during this period wasn't about dominance or personal power. It was about survival expertise and group welfare. The individual who made the best defensive decisions, who could read the night sounds most accurately, who understood weather patterns and predator behavior, naturally assumed protective responsibilities. Authority flowed from competence, not from physical strength or intimidation. These nighttime leadership roles created humanity's first professional specializations. The guard who excelled at detecting approaching threats. The fire tender who understood combustion and fuel management. The weather reader who could predict storms and temperature changes. Each specialty contributed to group survival, and each specialist earned respect and resources proportional to their protective contribution. The development of shift systems for nighttime duties revealed sophisticated understanding of human psychology and physiology. Your ancestors learned that attention spans varied by individual and time of night. Some people remained alert for longer periods, but needed extended recovery time. Others could maintain shorter bursts of intense focus but recover quickly. The most effective guard schedules matched individual capabilities to optimal duty periods. Training systems emerged to develop and maintain these specialized skills. Experienced guards taught newcomers how to distinguish between threatening and harmless sounds. Fire tenders passed down knowledge about wood selection, ember management, and smoke control. Weather readers shared techniques for reading cloud patterns, wind shifts, and atmospheric pressure changes. These knowledge transfer systems became humanity's first educational institutions. Not formal schools, but structured learning environments where survival skills were systematically transmitted from experienced practitioners to eager students. The curriculum was life and death. The graduation ceremony was successful completion of independent night watches. Quality control measures developed to ensure protective standards remained high. Guards who failed to detect approaching threats faced social consequences that motivated better performance. Fire tenders whose flames died during critical hours lost status and resources until they demonstrated improved competence. Weather readers whose predictions proved wrong faced skepticism until their accuracy improved. But the most important protective innovation happening during these nighttime hours was psychological. Your ancestors were learning to overcome the paralyzing fear that darkness naturally triggered in diurnal creatures. They were developing confidence in their protective systems, trust in their fellow group members, and faith in their ability to survive challenges that would destroy other species. This psychological transformation was as crucial as any physical adaptation. Fear could be as deadly as any predator, causing poor decisions, energy waste, and group cohesion breakdown. Learning to manage fear, to channel it into productive alertness rather than paralyzing terror, became a core survival skill that distinguished successful groups from those that perished in the darkness. The morning routine reveals how nighttime protection strategies influenced daytime activities. Equipment had to be quickly packed and distributed for travel. Guards needed rapid recovery methods to restore alertness for the day's challenges. Fire management techniques had to ensure coals could be preserved for evening use or quickly extinguished to avoid attracting unwanted attention. These transition periods between night and day became times of maximum vulnerability. Predators often hunted during dawn and dusk when changing light conditions provided tactical advantages. Your ancestors developed specific protocols for these dangerous transitions, with heightened security measures and accelerated preparation procedures that minimized exposure time. The gear they carried revealed the sophistication of their protective thinking. Multi-purpose items that served different functions during day and night cycles. Clothing that could be quickly reconfigured for changing conditions. Tools that doubled as weapons when threats emerged. Every item had to justify its weight and bulk through multiple protective contributions. Storage and transportation systems evolved to support these complex equipment requirements. The first backpacks and carrying frames were designed specifically to accommodate protective gear while maintaining mobility. Weight distribution techniques ensured that essential items remained accessible during emergencies. Redundant systems meant that losing one critical piece of equipment wouldn't compromise entire protective strategies. As your group prepares to face another day in this hostile landscape, you witness something remarkable. These early humans aren't just surviving anymore, they're beginning to thrive. Each night successfully navigated adds to their confidence. Each protective innovation increases their capabilities. Each lesson learned improves their chances of seeing another sunrise. The accumulated wisdom of countless nights spent developing protective strategies is transforming your species. You're becoming creatures who can venture into territories that would kill other animals. You're developing the confidence to explore new environments, to experiment with different survival strategies, to push the boundaries of what's possible for a relatively small, physically weak primate. This confidence isn't reckless. It's built on proven protective systems that have been tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. Your ancestors understand their capabilities and limitations. They know when to take calculated risks and when to prioritize safety. They've learned to balance boldness with prudence in ways that maximize survival while enabling progress. The social bonds forged during these nighttime protection efforts are creating unprecedented group cohesion. Individuals who have repeatedly trusted their lives to their companions develop loyalty and cooperation that transcends normal primate social structures. These bonds become the foundation for larger group formations, extended tribal networks, and eventually the complex societies that will dominate the planet. But perhaps most importantly, the mindset being developed here is revolutionary. Your ancestors are learning that they don't have to accept the world as they find it. They can modify it, improve it, and adapt it to their needs. Every protective innovation proves that human ingenuity can overcome natural limitations. Every successful night spent in safety demonstrates that intelligence and cooperation can triumph over tooth and claw. The morning sun rises on a species that is fundamentally different from the one that sought shelter the night before. Not biologically, but psychologically. These early humans have spent the dark hours proving to themselves that they can master their environment rather than merely endure it. They've developed systems and strategies that turn their apparent weaknesses into unprecedented strengths. As they break camp and prepare for another day of challenges, they carry with them something no other species possesses. The knowledge that protection isn't just about thick hides or sharp claws. It's about intelligence, cooperation, and the refusal to accept limitations that seem insurmountable. They're becoming the species that will eventually build cities, develop technologies, and explore other worlds. But all of that is still far in the future. For now, they're simply early humans who have learned to sleep safely in a dangerous world. And that simple achievement contains the seeds of every protection innovation that will follow. The morning light reveals something extraordinary happening across the landscape. Your group isn't alone out here. In the distance, thin columns of smoke rise from other campfires, marking the locations of other human bands who survived the night using similar protective strategies. This is the dawn of something unprecedented in Earth's history. A species that's learning to coordinate survival efforts across vast territories. These distant smoke signals aren't accidental. They're humanity's first communication network, a system that allows groups separated by miles of dangerous terrain to share critical survival information. The timing of when fires are lit, the color and density of the smoke, even the duration of the signals, all carry meaning. A steady column might indicate all is well. Intermittent puffs could signal the discovery of fresh water or abundant game. Thick, dark smoke rising urgently warns of immediate danger approaching. Your ancestors are developing what we might recognize as the first emergency broadcast system. When one group encounters a massive predator or discovers a new threat, that information spreads rapidly across the network of allied bands. This shared intelligence multiplies each group's survival chances exponentially. A saber-toothed cat that might surprise and devastate an isolated band becomes a known threat that multiple groups can track and avoid. But the most remarkable aspect of this communication system is how it's driving protective innovation. When one group develops a new defensive strategy or creates an improved piece of protective equipment, that knowledge spreads through the network. The best ideas for shelter construction, the most effective clothing designs, the most successful predator deterrent techniques, all propagate from group to group, like beneficial mutations in humanity's cultural DNA. This is where protection becomes truly revolutionary. Individual groups might develop one or two innovative solutions through their own experimentation, but networked groups can access dozens of innovations developed by allied bands facing similar challenges. The rate of protective advancement accelerates dramatically when knowledge can be shared rather than independently rediscovered by each isolated group. You witness this knowledge transfer in action as your band encounters another group at a shared water source. The meeting isn't accidental. Both groups have been coordinating their movements to arrive at this location simultaneously, maximizing safety through numbers while sharing the risks of approaching a dangerous but necessary resource. The two groups don't simply exchange pleasantries and part ways. They engage in intensive information sharing that resembles a primitive scientific conference. Individuals with specialized knowledge demonstrate their techniques to interested counterparts. New tool designs are examined and copied. Protective clothing innovations are studied and adapted. Successful hunting strategies are shared and refined through collaborative discussion. Watch how they handle the hide processing demonstration. An expert from the visiting group shows your band a new technique for creating waterproof leather using a combination of plant oils and animal brain matter. The process is complex, requiring specific timing and temperature control that took months of experimentation to perfect. But through careful observation and hands-on instruction, your group's leather workers master the technique in a single afternoon. This knowledge transfer represents a quantum leap in protective capability. Your group now has access to waterproof clothing technology that would have taken them potentially years to develop independently. Meanwhile, they share their own innovation, a method for creating flexible joint protection using overlapping scales of hardened hide. Both groups leave the encounter significantly better protected than when they arrived. The social protocols governing these knowledge exchanges are surprisingly sophisticated. Not all information is freely shared. Groups guard their most advanced secrets, trading them only for equally valuable innovations or in exchange for specific resources and favors. This creates a primitive but effective intellectual property system that encourages continued innovation while enabling beneficial knowledge transfer. The competitive aspects of this system drive protective advancement in unexpected ways. Groups that fall behind in protective innovation face increased mortality rates and reduced access to prime resources. This selective pressure rewards creativity and punishes complacency. The most innovative groups grow larger and more successful, spreading their protective technologies through intermarriage and alliance formation. But cooperation remains the dominant theme. The shared challenges of survival in such a hostile environment create powerful incentives for mutual assistance. A group that refuses to share life-saving knowledge with allies may find themselves isolated and vulnerable when they face their own crisis. Reciprocity becomes a survival necessity, not just a moral choice. As the two groups prepare to separate and continue their respective journeys, you observe the emergence of something that will become central to human civilization: standardization. The visiting group's tools and clothing don't just work well, they work in consistent, predictable ways that can be replicated across different environments and circumstances. This standardization isn't imposed from above by some central authority. It emerges naturally as groups discover which designs and techniques prove most reliable under the widest range of conditions. Clothing patterns that work well in both hot and cold weather become more widely adopted than specialized garments with limited applications. Tool designs that maintain their effectiveness, whether made from different stone types or wood species, spread more rapidly than techniques requiring specific materials. The development of measurement systems begins during this period as groups need ways to communicate the specifications of successful protective innovations. How thick should waterproof leather be? What's the optimal length for a spear shaft? How much animal brain matter is needed to process a hide of specific size? These questions require standardized answers if knowledge is to be effectively transferred between groups. Primitive measurement units emerge based on readily available references. Body parts become standard lengths. Hand spans, forearm lengths, and pace distances provide consistent units that any group can understand and replicate. The thickness of processed leather is measured in finger widths. Spear lengths are expressed in multiples of arm spans. These anthropometric standards ensure that protective innovations can be accurately reproduced by groups who have never seen the original examples. Quality control becomes increasingly important as protective technologies grow more sophisticated. A poorly made waterproof garment isn't just ineffective, it can be dangerously misleading, encouraging risky behavior based on false confidence in protective capabilities. Standards developed for testing and validating protective equipment before lives depend on its performance. Testing protocols emerge that push protective gear to its limits under controlled conditions. Waterproof clothing is subjected to extended soaking to ensure seals remain intact. Cutting tools are tested against various materials to verify edge retention. Shelter designs are evaluated under simulated storm conditions to confirm structural integrity. These systematic testing approaches represent humanity's first quality assurance programs. The psychological impact of reliable protective equipment transforms group behavior in profound ways. Confidence in their defensive capabilities allows groups to venture into previously forbidden territories. Dense forests, where visibility is limited, become accessible when protective clothing prevents injury from thorns and branches. Marshy areas rich in resources can be safely exploited when waterproof gear keeps feet dry and protected from waterborne pathogens. This expanding territorial range creates new challenges that drive further protective innovation. Different environments present unique threats that require specialized solutions. The thick vegetation of forest floors demands clothing that resists tearing while remaining flexible enough for climbing and crawling. Rocky mountain terrain requires footwear that provides both protection and secure grip on varied surfaces. Regional specialization begins to develop as groups focus on perfecting protective solutions for their specific environments. Desert dwellers become experts in sun protection and heat management. Mountain groups develop superior cold weather gear and altitude adaptation techniques. Forest specialists create the most effective protection against thorns, insects, and low visibility hazards. But this specialization doesn't lead to isolation. Instead, it creates trade opportunities that strengthen the intergroup network. Desert specialists trade their superior sun protection technology for mountain groups' cold weather innovations. Forest experts exchange their thorn-resistant clothing designs for coastal groups' waterproof technologies. This specialization and trade system accelerates protective advancement across all environments. The emergence of traveling specialists represents another revolutionary development. Certain individuals become so skilled at specific protective technologies that they move between groups, sharing their expertise in exchange for resources and protection. These early consultants carry advanced knowledge across vast distances, cross-pollinating innovations between groups that might never otherwise encounter each other. Master leather workers travel established routes between allied groups, teaching advanced hide processing techniques and learning new innovations to carry to the next destination. Expert toolmakers journey between resource-rich areas, creating specialized equipment for different groups while gathering knowledge about new materials and techniques. These knowledge carriers become living libraries of protective technology, preserving and spreading innovations that might otherwise be lost when individual groups face catastrophic losses. The development of apprenticeship systems ensures that critical knowledge doesn't disappear when expert practitioners die or are killed. Promising young individuals are identified and trained intensively in specialized protective technologies. Multiple apprentices learn each critical skill set, creating redundancy that protects against knowledge loss. The most advanced techniques are taught to apprentices from different groups, ensuring that innovations survive even if entire bands are wiped out by disasters or predator attacks. Training standardization becomes necessary as protective technologies grow more complex. A poorly trained apprentice who creates defective protective equipment doesn't just risk their own life, they endanger everyone who depends on that equipment. Systematic training protocols develop that ensure consistent skill levels across different groups and instructors. Master craftspeople develop teaching methods that efficiently transfer complex knowledge to apprentices with varying backgrounds and capabilities. Step-by-step processes are broken down into manageable components that can be mastered individually. before being combined into complete techniques. Error. Correction methods help identify and fix common mistakes before they become ingrained habits. Assessment procedures verify that apprentices have achieved competency before they're trusted with critical protective equipment production. The social status of protective technology specialists rises dramatically as their skills become more essential to group survival. Master leather workers, expert tool makers, and innovative clothing designers command respect and resources comparable to the best hunters and warriors. This elevated status attracts talented individuals to specialize in protective technologies, accelerating advancement through increased human capital investment. Competition between specialists drives continuous improvement in protective innovations. Master craftspeople develop signature techniques and jealously guard trade secrets that distinguish their work from competitors. This competitive pressure rewards creativity and excellence while punishing complacency and inferior workmanship. The resulting innovations benefit entire groups as specialists strive to create the most effective protective solutions possible. But cooperation remains essential even among competing specialists. The challenges of creating truly effective protective equipment in such a resource-constrained environment require collaboration and knowledge sharing. Specialists who refuse to cooperate with peers often find themselves isolated and unable to access the diverse knowledge base necessary for breakthrough innovations. Collaborative workshops become regular features of intergroup gatherings. Multiple specialists work together on complex projects that exceed any individual's capabilities. A master leather worker might team with an expert tool maker and an innovative designer to create protective equipment that incorporates advanced materials, science, precision manufacturing, and ergonomic design principles. These collaborative efforts produce protective innovations that represent quantum leaps beyond what any individual specialist could achieve alone. The documentation of protective knowledge becomes increasingly important as innovations grow more complex and specialists become more numerous. Without writing systems, knowledge must be preserved through other methods that ensure accurate transmission across generations. Mnemonic systems develop that encode complex technical information in memorable songs, stories, and ritual performances. Protective technologies are embedded in creation myths and heroic tales that preserve technical specifications within engaging narratives. The proper ratio of brain matter to plant oils for leather treatment might be encoded in a story about a hero who defeats a monster by using precisely the right amount of magical ingredients. Clothing construction techniques are preserved in ritual songs where the verse structure mirrors the step-by-step process of garment assembly. These narrative preservation systems serve multiple functions beyond simple knowledge storage. They make technical information more engaging and memorable for apprentices learning complex procedures. They embed quality control standards within cultural traditions that discourage deviation from proven techniques. They create social reinforcement for maintaining high standards of protective equipment production. Physical models and templates begin appearing as protective technologies become more standardized. Master craftspeople create reference examples that demonstrate proper construction techniques and acceptable quality standards. These physical standards travel between groups, ensuring consistent application of advanced protective technologies across the expanding human network. Template systems develop that allow less skilled individuals to produce acceptable protective equipment by following proven patterns. Leather cutting guides ensure consistent sizing and proportions for clothing components. Tool-making jigs help maintain proper angles and dimensions for critical implements. Shelter construction models demonstrate optimal proportions and assembly sequences for defensive structures. The emergence of protective equipment maintenance traditions represents another crucial development. Creating effective protective gear is only the beginning. Maintaining that equipment in operational condition throughout its service life requires additional specialized knowledge and techniques that must also be preserved and transmitted. Maintenance schedules develop based on accumulated experience with different types of protective equipment under various environmental conditions. Leather goods require regular cleaning and conditioning to maintain flexibility and water resistance. Cutting tools need periodic sharpening and handle replacement to remain effective. Shelter components must be inspected and repaired before minor damage becomes structural failure. Repair techniques become as important as original construction methods. Field expedient repairs that can be performed with limited tools and materials under emergency conditions. Permanent restoration procedures that return damaged equipment to full effectiveness. Upgrade modifications that improve protective capabilities of existing equipment without complete replacement. The resource management systems supporting protective equipment production become increasingly sophisticated as demand grows and supply sources become more competitive. Raw material procurement, processing, storage, and allocation require careful planning and coordination to ensure continuous production of essential protective gear. Inventory management systems track available materials and anticipate future needs based on seasonal patterns and group size projections. Procurement strategies balance the risks and costs of obtaining raw materials from various sources. Processing schedules coordinate the complex sequences of operations required to transform raw materials into finished protective equipment. Quality control extends beyond individual items to encompass entire production systems. Batch testing procedures verify that materials from different sources meet performance standards. Process monitoring ensures that production techniques remain consistent across different craftspeople and time periods. Performance tracking identifies equipment failures and their root causes to prevent recurrence. As these protection systems mature and spread across the expanding human population, they create feedback loops that accelerate both technological advancement and population growth. Better protection enables groups to survive in harsher environments and exploit previously inaccessible resources. Larger sustainable populations support more specialists and enable more complex collaborative projects. Increased specialization drives faster technological advancement, which improves protection capabilities, which enables further population growth and territorial expansion. This virtuous cycle of protection, population, and innovation is transforming your species from scattered bands of vulnerable primates into a coordinated network of increasingly sophisticated survivors. The foundation is being laid for everything that will follow in human history. Cities, agriculture, industry, and eventually space exploration all trace their roots back to these early innovations in protection and survival. But we're still in the very beginning of this story. The humans gathered around these ancient fires don't yet know they're destined to inherit the Earth. They're simply focused on surviving another day, creating better protection against immediate threats, and sharing their innovations with allied groups facing similar challenges. The sun climbs higher, and it's time for these early innovators to break camp and continue their endless journey across a landscape that's becoming slightly less hostile with each protective innovation they develop. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to prove that intelligence and cooperation can triumph over any natural limitation. The seeds of human civilization are germinating in these simple acts of protection and survival. Every piece of clothing, every defensive strategy, every collaborative innovation is helping to write the opening chapters of humanity's greatest story. The story of how a small, weak, nearly defenseless species learned to master the world through the power of protective innovation. The afternoon heat is becoming unbearable, and you're witnessing something that will reshape human development forever. Your ancestors are discovering that protection isn't just about individual survival anymore. It's about creating systems that allow entire communities to thrive in conditions that should kill them. Watch what happens when your group encounters a natural shelter, a rocky overhang that provides shade and wind protection. This isn't just a place to rest. It's becoming humanity's first real estate. The group doesn't simply use the shelter and move on. They begin modifying it, improving it, making it more defensible and comfortable for future use. Stones are carefully positioned to create wind barriers and sleeping platforms. Thorny branches are woven together to block access routes that predators might use. Fire pits are dug in optimal locations that provide warmth and light, while minimizing smoke exposure. What you're witnessing is the birth of architecture, the moment when humans stopped simply occupying space and started designing it. But the most revolutionary aspect of this shelter modification is that it's being done for future use, not just immediate comfort. Your ancestors are planning ahead, investing labor and resources in improvements that will benefit the group when they return to this location. This forward-thinking approach to protection represents a cognitive leap that separates humans from every other species on the planet. The concept of permanent improvement spreads like wildfire through the group. Individuals begin caching supplies at strategic locations along their regular travel routes, protected storage areas where emergency equipment can be hidden from predators and weather, water collection systems that funnel rainwater into natural basins, landmark modifications that make navigation easier during storms or low visibility conditions. These infrastructure projects require unprecedented cooperation and resource allocation. Multiple individuals must contribute labor to projects that may not benefit them personally, but will serve the group's long-term survival needs. Someone has to gather the stones for shelter walls, while others hunt for food. Some individuals must sacrifice immediate comfort to work on improvements that won't pay dividends until future visits. The social contracts governing these collaborative projects become increasingly complex. Who decides which improvements are most important? How is labor allocated between immediate survival needs and long-term infrastructure development? What happens when individuals disagree about resource priorities or construction methods? Leadership structures evolve to handle these decisions, but they're unlike anything seen in other primate societies. Authority isn't based purely on physical dominance or age. Instead, it flows from demonstrated expertise in protective innovation and successful project management. The individual who consistently makes good decisions about shelter improvement and resource allocation naturally assumes leadership responsibilities. These leaders don't rule through intimidation or force. Their authority depends on continued success in keeping the group safe and improving their collective protective capabilities. A leader who makes poor decisions about infrastructure investment or defensive priorities quickly loses influence as group members recognize that their survival depends on better judgment. The emergence of specialized leadership roles creates humanity's first management hierarchies. Project coordinators who organize complex construction efforts. Resource managers who allocate materials and labor. Quality supervisors who ensure that protective improvements meet safety and durability standards. Each role requires specific skills and knowledge that must be developed and maintained through training and experience. But perhaps the most important leadership development is the emergence of strategic planners. Individuals who think beyond immediate survival need to anticipate future challenges and opportunities. They study seasonal patterns to predict when and where resources will be available. They analyze predator behavior to identify the safest travel routes and camping locations. They evaluate potential threats to develop contingency plans and backup strategies. These strategic thinkers become invaluable to group survival as environmental challenges grow more complex. Climate variations that affect water availability and food sources. Predator population changes that alter threat levels in different territories. Territorial conflicts with other human groups that require diplomatic or defensive responses. The information processing requirements for effective strategic planning drive the development of more sophisticated communication systems. Simple gestures and vocal signals aren't adequate for conveying complex strategic concepts and detailed contingency plans. More elaborate symbolic systems begin emerging that can represent abstract ideas and future scenarios. Tactical communication becomes essential during defensive situations. Silent signals that coordinate group responses to approaching threats. Warning systems that convey specific information about predator types and locations. Command structures that ensure rapid decision-making during crisis situations without dangerous delays or confusion. These communication advances enable more sophisticated protective strategies, coordinated defense formations that maximize the group's fighting effectiveness, diversionary tactics that confuse and misdirect attackers, escape procedures that ensure vulnerable group members can reach safety while fighters delay pursuing predators. The psychological aspects of group defense create powerful bonding experiences that strengthen social cohesion. Individuals who have fought together to defend the group develop trust and loyalty that transcends normal social relationships. These combat bonds become the foundation for more complex social structures and cooperative behaviors. Training systems develop to ensure that all group members can contribute effectively to collective defense efforts. Combat techniques that leverage human strengths while minimizing exposure to predator advantages. Weapon handling skills that maximize effectiveness with primitive tools. Tactical awareness training that helps individuals make good decisions during high-stress defensive situations. But the most important training focuses on overcoming the natural fear responses that could prove fatal during predator encounters. Learning to think clearly and act decisively when faced with creatures that trigger every instinct to flee or freeze. Developing the controlled aggression necessary to fight effectively while maintaining tactical discipline. Mock combat exercises become regular training activities that prepare group members for real defensive situations. Controlled scenarios that simulate predator attacks without actual danger. Role-playing exercises that practice communication and coordination during crisis situations. Equipment testing that ensures weapons and protective gear function properly under combat stress. These training programs reveal individual differences in combat aptitude and defensive capabilities. Some group members excel at direct confrontation, while others prove better at support roles or tactical coordination. Recognition of these individual strengths leads to specialized defensive assignments that maximize each person's contribution to group security. The development of combat specializations creates humanity's first warrior class, though it's nothing like the military hierarchies that will emerge in later civilizations. These early warriors aren't professional soldiers who fight for conquest or glory. They're specialists who focus on perfecting defensive capabilities that keep their communities safe from predators and hostile environments. Weapons technology advances rapidly as combat specialists experiment with different designs and materials. Spear points that maintain their sharpness through repeated use. Club designs that maximize impact while remaining maneuverable. Projectile systems that extend effective range while conserving materials and energy. But weapons aren't the only focus of combat innovation. Defensive equipment becomes equally important as specialists learn to balance protection with mobility and offensive capability. Shield designs that deflect attacks while allowing counterattacks. Armor systems that protect vital areas without restricting movement. Helmet concepts that guard against head trauma while maintaining vision and hearing. The integration of offensive and defensive capabilities creates equipment systems rather than individual tools. Weapons and armor that work together to maximize combat effectiveness. Coordination between different specialists who complement each other's capabilities. Group tactics that leverage individual equipment advantages while compensating for weaknesses. Maintenance of combat equipment becomes a critical survival skill as weapons and armor grow more sophisticated. field repair techniques that can restore damaged equipment during extended travels, preventive maintenance procedures that ensure reliability during crisis situations, replacement protocols that minimize downtime when equipment fails or is lost. The resource requirements for maintaining combat-ready equipment create new challenges for group logistics. Raw materials that must be obtained from distant or dangerous locations. Processing techniques that require specialized knowledge and time-intensive procedures. Storage methods that protect finished equipment from damage and deterioration. Trade relationships with other groups become essential for obtaining the diverse materials needed for advanced protective equipment. Specialized stones for cutting tools. Particular plant materials for cordage and textile applications. Specific animal products for leather treatment and waterproofing applications. These trade networks create diplomatic challenges that require new forms of social interaction. Negotiation protocols that establish fair exchange rates for different materials and finished goods. Conflict resolution procedures that handle disputes without escalating to violence. Alliance agreements that provide mutual support during resource shortages or external threats. The diplomatic skills required for successful trade relationships become another form of protective capability. Groups that can negotiate effectively have access to better materials and technologies. Communities that build strong alliance networks can call for assistance during emergencies. Bands that develop positive reputations become preferred trading partners with access to the best innovations. Cultural exchange becomes an inevitable byproduct of these trade relationships as groups share not just materials, but knowledge, techniques, and ideas. Different approaches to protective equipment design that reflect varying environmental challenges. Alternative solutions to common survival problems that expand the range of available options. Innovation concepts that spark new developments when combined with local materials and needs. This cultural cross-pollination accelerates protective technology advancement by combining the best ideas from multiple sources. Design concepts from mountain specialists adapted for desert conditions. Waterproofing techniques from coastal groups applied to cold weather gear. Weapon innovations from forest dwellers modified for open savanna use. The competitive aspects of intergroup relationships also drive protective innovation as communities strive to maintain advantages over potential rivals. Superior equipment that provides tactical advantages during territorial disputes. Better defensive capabilities that deter aggressive behavior from neighboring groups. More effective survival technologies that allow expansion into contested resources areas. But competition remains balanced by cooperation, as all human groups face similar environmental challenges that threaten species survival. Shared threats that require collaborative responses. Common enemies that unite otherwise competitive communities. Universal needs for protective technologies that benefit from shared development efforts. The balance between competition and cooperation creates optimal conditions for rapid protective advancement. Competitive pressure that rewards innovation and excellence. Cooperative opportunities that enable knowledge sharing and resource pooling. Market dynamics that efficiently distribute the most effective protective technologies across the expanding human population. As the afternoon progresses, and your group continues their journey across this ancient landscape, you're witnessing the emergence of humanity's first industrial complex. Not factories and assembly lines, but an interconnected network of specialists, traders, innovators, and users who are collectively advancing protective technology at an unprecedented rate. The feedback loops between different components of this system are creating exponential advancement in protective capabilities. Better equipment enables expansion into new territories with different challenges. New environmental pressures drive innovation in specialized protective solutions. Improved technologies support larger populations that can sustain more specialists and more complex collaborative projects. Regional variations in protective technology are beginning to reflect the diverse environments that humans are learning to inhabit. Desert specialists developing superior sun protection and heat management systems. Arctic experts creating advanced insulation and cold weather survival gear. Tropical innovators perfecting rain protection and humidity control technologies. But these regional specializations remain connected through trade networks and cultural exchange systems that prevent technological isolation. The best innovations spread rapidly across the entire human network, adapted and modified to meet local conditions while retaining their essential effectiveness. The emergence of quality standards and performance testing becomes essential as protective technologies grow more complex and failure consequences become more severe. Systematic evaluation procedures that verify equipment performance before lives depend on it. Standardized testing protocols that ensure consistent quality across different manufacturers and materials. User feedback systems develop that capture performance information from field applications and feed it back to designers and manufacturers. Reports of equipment failures that lead to design improvements. Success stories that validate effective innovations and encourage wider adoption. Performance data that guides resource allocation and development priorities. The social status of protective technology specialists continues rising as their contributions become more essential to community survival and expansion. Master craftspeople who command respect comparable to the most successful hunters and warriors. Innovation leaders whose ideas shape the direction of technological development. Quality experts whose standards determine equipment reliability and safety. This elevated status attracts the most talented individuals to specialize in protective technology development, creating positive feedback loops that accelerate advancement. Increased human capital investment in protective innovation. More sophisticated training programs that develop advanced capabilities. Better resource allocation that supports complex development projects. Educational systems become more formalized as protective knowledge grows too complex for casual transmission. Structured apprenticeship programs that ensure systematic skill development. Standardized curricula that cover essential knowledge areas. Assessment procedures that verify competency before individuals are trusted with critical responsibilities. The preservation of accumulated knowledge becomes increasingly important as innovations multiply and specialists become more numerous. Memory techniques that enable accurate transmission of complex technical information. Documentation systems that record successful procedures and failed experiments. Archive methods that protect knowledge from loss during disasters or conflicts. But perhaps the most important development during this period is psychological. Your ancestors are learning to see themselves not as victims of their environment, but as masters of it. Every successful protective innovation proves that human intelligence can overcome natural limitations. Every collaborative project demonstrates that organized effort can achieve goals beyond individual capabilities. This growing confidence transforms group behavior in profound ways. Willingness to explore previously forbidden territories. Eagerness to experiment with new protective concepts. Commitment to long-term projects that may not show benefits for years. Investment in infrastructure and institutions that support continued advancement. The cumulative effect of these psychological changes is creating a species that refuses to accept limitations. When faced with new challenges, humans no longer simply endure or retreat. They analyze the problem, develop solutions, test those solutions, and implement the most effective approaches. This problem-solving mindset becomes humanity's defining characteristic. As evening approaches and your group begins searching for another night's shelter, you realize that something fundamental has changed since this morning. They're no longer just surviving in this landscape. They're beginning to transform it. Every shelter improvement, every cached supply, every cleared path represents human agency reshaping the natural world. The tools and techniques they're developing will eventually enable the construction of cities, the development of agriculture, and the exploration of other worlds. But more importantly, The mindset they're developing, the refusal to accept limitations, and the commitment to continuous improvement will drive every future advancement in human civilization. Tonight, as they settle in around their carefully tended fire, protected by increasingly sophisticated equipment and strategies, your ancestors are laying the foundation for humanity's greatest achievements. They don't know it yet, but they're writing the opening chapters of the most remarkable story in Earth's history. The story of how intelligence and cooperation conquered a hostile universe. The fire crackles in the gathering darkness, and the first stars are appearing in the vast African sky. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities for protective innovation. But tonight, surrounded by the tools and shelters they've created, your ancestors can rest with confidence that they're becoming something the world has never seen before. They're becoming human. The darkness brings with it a revelation that will reshape everything you thought you knew about human development. As your ancestors settle into their protective routines, something extraordinary is happening in their minds. They're not just remembering what worked today, they're imagining what could work better tomorrow. This capacity for mental simulation, for running protective scenarios in their heads before testing them in reality, represents a cognitive breakthrough that separates humans from every other species on the planet. While other animals rely on instinct and immediate experience, your ancestors are developing the ability to think through complex problems, to visualize solutions, and to plan protective strategies for situations they've never encountered. Watch how they're using this newfound mental capacity. Around the fire, individuals are gesturing with their hands, sketching invisible designs in the air as they describe improved shelter concepts to their companions. They're not just talking about what happened today, they're actively designing tomorrow's protective innovations through collaborative imagination. This mental modeling capability transforms protective development from random experimentation to systematic engineering. Instead of trying dozens of failed designs before stumbling on something that works, your ancestors can now eliminate obviously flawed concepts through mental testing. They can refine promising ideas before investing precious materials and labor in physical construction. The social aspects of this cognitive development are equally revolutionary. Multiple minds working together can explore far more protective possibilities than any individual could imagine alone. Different people contribute different perspectives, different experiences, and different creative insights that combine to generate breakthrough innovations no single person could have conceived. Collaborative problem-solving sessions become regular features of evening gatherings. Complex protective challenges are broken down into smaller components that can be analysed and solved individually. Alternative approaches are proposed, evaluated and refined through group discussion. The best ideas are selected for testing while inferior concepts are discarded before they waste valuable resources. These group innovation sessions develop their own protocols and procedures that maximize creative output while maintaining focus on practical solutions. Structured brainstorming methods that encourage wild ideas while filtering out impossible concepts. Evaluation criteria that prioritize solutions based on resource requirements, difficulty of implementation, and potential protective benefits. The emergence of systematic innovation processes creates humanity's first research and development programs. Not formal institutions, but organized approaches to protective technology advancement that consistently generate useful improvements. Hypothesis formation based on observed problems and potential solutions. Experimental design that tests specific aspects of protective innovations under controlled conditions. Data collection and analysis that guides further development efforts. But perhaps the most important aspect of this cognitive revolution is its cumulative nature. Each successful protective innovation becomes part of humanity's growing knowledge base, available to inform future development efforts. Failures are equally valuable, providing information about what doesn't work and why, preventing repetition of costly mistakes. Knowledge management systems developed to organize and preserve this growing database of protective information. Classification schemes that group related innovations and techniques together. Cross-referencing methods that connect different types of protective solutions to common underlying principles. Search strategies that help individuals quickly locate relevant information when facing new challenges. The speed of protective advancement accelerates dramatically as this knowledge base grows and becomes more accessible. New innovations can build on proven foundations rather than starting from scratch. Existing techniques can be combined in novel ways to create hybrid solutions that exceed the capabilities of their individual components. Breakthrough concepts can be rapidly applied across multiple protective applications. Specialization deepens as the knowledge base becomes too extensive for any individual to master completely. Experts emerge who focus on specific aspects of protective technology while maintaining awareness of developments in related fields. These specialists become nodes in humanity's expanding knowledge network, connecting different areas of protective innovation through their cross-disciplinary understanding. The training of these specialists becomes increasingly sophisticated as the knowledge they must master grows more complex. Formal apprenticeship programs that provide systematic exposure to essential concepts and techniques. Continuing education systems that keep specialists current with rapidly evolving developments. Peer review processes that maintain quality standards and prevent the propagation of ineffective or dangerous innovations. Quality control becomes more rigorous as protective technologies become more complex and their failure consequences more severe. Systematic testing procedures that evaluate innovations under realistic conditions before they're adopted for critical applications. Performance monitoring systems that track equipment effectiveness over extended periods. Failure analysis programs that identify root causes of protective equipment problems and develop solutions to prevent recurrence. But the most remarkable development during this period is the emergence of protective philosophy. Your ancestors are beginning to think systematically about the principles underlying effective protection. They're developing theories about why certain approaches work, while others fail. They're discovering universal principles that apply across different types of protective challenges. This philosophical approach transforms protective development from empirical trial and error to theory-guided engineering. Instead of randomly trying different approaches until something works, your ancestors can now apply general principles to generate targeted solutions for specific problems. They can predict which protective concepts are likely to succeed based on theoretical understanding rather than expensive experimentation. The development of protective theories creates common languages that enable more effective collaboration between specialists. Shared concepts and terminology that allow precise communication about complex technical issues. Standardized analytical frameworks that help different experts understand and evaluate each other's innovations. Common problem-solving methodologies that can be applied across diverse protective challenges. These theoretical frameworks also enable more effective teaching and knowledge transfer. Abstract principles can be taught once and then applied to multiple specific situations. General problem-solving strategies can be learned and then adapted to address novel challenges. Universal concepts provide foundations that support rapid mastery of specialized techniques. The emergence of protective science marks a turning point in human development. Your ancestors are no longer simply creating better tools and techniques through accumulated experience. They're developing systematic understanding of the principles that govern effective protection. They're becoming engineers rather than mere craftsmen. This scientific approach to protection generates innovations at an unprecedented rate. Theoretical insights that suggest entirely new categories of protective solutions. Systematic analysis that identifies previously overlooked opportunities for improvement. Predictive models that anticipate future protective needs and guide development efforts accordingly. The integration of theory and practice creates powerful feedback loops that accelerate advancement in both areas. Practical experience that tests and refines theoretical understanding. theoretical insights that suggest new practical applications and improvements, collaborative relationships between theorists and practitioners that ensure developments remain grounded in real-world needs while pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Regional variations in protective philosophy begin emerging as different groups face different environmental challenges and develop specialized expertise. Desert theorists who focus on heat management and water conservation principles, mountain philosophers who specialize in cold weather protection and altitude adaptation concepts, forest thinkers who develop theories about visibility-limited environments and vegetation-based threats. But these regional philosophical traditions remain connected through trade networks and cultural exchange systems that prevent intellectual isolation. Theoretical concepts spread rapidly across the human network, adapted and modified to meet local conditions while retaining their essential validity. Cross-pollination between different philosophical traditions generates hybrid approaches that combine the best insights from multiple sources. The competitive aspects of intergroup relationships drive theoretical development as communities strive to maintain advantages over potential rivals. Superior understanding that enables more effective protective innovations, better predictive capabilities that allow anticipation of future challenges, more efficient development processes that generate improvements faster than competing groups. Educational institutions become more formalized as protective knowledge becomes too complex for informal transmission. Structured learning programs that provide systematic exposure to theoretical principles and practical applications. Specialized schools that focus on particular aspects of protective technology. Advanced training centers that develop the most sophisticated specialists and theoretical thinkers. The preservation of theoretical knowledge becomes as important as maintaining practical skills. Documentation systems that record successful theories and failed hypotheses. Archive methods that protect intellectual achievements from loss during disasters or conflicts. Transmission protocols that ensure accurate transfer of complex theoretical concepts across generations. But perhaps the most significant development is psychological. Your ancestors are learning to see protection not as a series of isolated problems to be solved individually, but as a systematic challenge that can be addressed through organized intelligence and collaborative effort. They're developing confidence in their ability to understand and master any protective challenge through systematic application of theoretical principles. This intellectual confidence transforms human behavior in fundamental ways. Willingness to tackle protective challenges that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Eagerness to share knowledge and collaborate on complex problems. Commitment to long-term theoretical development that may not show practical benefits for years. The cumulative effect of these intellectual changes is creating a species that approaches challenges through systematic analysis rather than instinctive responses. When faced with new threats, humans no longer simply react based on previous experience. They analyze the underlying principles, develop theoretical models, design systematic solutions, and implement those solutions through coordinated effort. This analytical mindset becomes humanity's most powerful protective capability. More important than any specific tool or technique, it's the intellectual framework that enables continuous adaptation to new challenges and opportunities. The foundation for every future advancement in human protective technology, from medieval armor to modern spacecraft. As the night deepens, and your group settles into sleep surrounded by their increasingly sophisticated protective systems, they're dreaming of tomorrow's innovations. Not random fantasies, but systematic visualizations of improved protective concepts, guided by theoretical understanding and practical experience. These dreams aren't idle escapism. They're humanity's first computer simulations, mental models that test protective concepts before committing resources to physical implementation. The most promising dream innovations will be discussed around tomorrow night's fire, refined through collaborative analysis, and eventually implemented as real protective improvements. The fire burns lower, but the intellectual flame it represents burns brighter than ever. Your ancestors have discovered something more powerful than any physical tool or technique. They've learned how to think systematically about protection, how to understand the principles underlying effective solutions, and how to apply that understanding to generate continuous improvements in their defensive capabilities. This intellectual revolution is transforming them from creatures who react to their environment into beings who can analyze, understand, and systematically improve their relationship with that environment. They're becoming the species that will eventually master every challenge the universe can present, not through superior strength or speed, but through superior understanding and systematic application of protective principles. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to apply their growing theoretical understanding to practical protective problems. Each successful application will validate and refine their theories while generating new insights that push the boundaries of protective possibility even further. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, but the minds dreaming beneath them are creating patterns that will reshape the world, theoretical frameworks that will guide protective development for millennia to come, intellectual tools that will prove more powerful than any physical implement ever forged. They sleep peacefully, protected not just by their physical innovations, but by their growing confidence in their ability to understand and master any protective challenge through systematic thought and collaborative effort. They're becoming the species that refuses to accept limitations, that sees every obstacle as a problem to be solved rather than a barrier to be endured. The foundation is being laid for humanity's greatest intellectual achievement. Not just better tools or techniques, but better ways of thinking about protection that will eventually enable the conquest of space, the mastery of disease, and the development of technologies that seem magical by current standards. But all of that is still far in the future. For now, they're simply early humans who have learned to think systematically about staying alive in a dangerous world. And that simple intellectual achievement contains the seeds of every protective innovation that will follow, from the first woven garments to the life support systems that will one day carry humans to other worlds. The night passes peacefully, watched over by sentries who understand not just how to detect approaching threats, but why their detection methods work and how they might be improved. Protected by equipment that represents not just accumulated experience, but systematic application of theoretical principles to practical problems. Dawn will break on a species that has learned to think, and that changes everything. The first light of dawn reveals something that would astound any modern observer. Your ancestors aren't just waking up with better protection than they had yesterday. They're waking up with a completely transformed relationship to the concept of vulnerability itself. What you're witnessing is the moment when humans stopped seeing themselves as naturally defenseless creatures and started understanding that defenselessness was simply a problem waiting to be solved. Look at how they're approaching this new day. There's no desperate scramble for immediate survival, no panicked assessment of overnight threats. Instead, there's methodical evaluation of their protective systems, systematic planning for the day's challenges, and collaborative discussion of potential improvements. They've transformed from reactive survivors into proactive engineers of their own safety. This morning routine reveals the emergence of something unprecedented in Earth's history: preventive protection. Instead of simply responding to threats as they appear, your ancestors are learning to anticipate dangers and neutralize them before they become life-threatening. They're studying weather patterns to predict storms, tracking predator movements to avoid encounters, and identifying environmental hazards before they cause injuries. The psychological impact of this shift cannot be overstated. When you know you can predict and prevent most threats, fear transforms from paralyzing terror into productive caution. Energy that was once wasted on constant anxiety can now be directed toward creative problem-solving and collaborative innovation. The human mind is being freed from survival mode and enabled to operate at levels of sophistication that will eventually reshape the planet. But this mental liberation comes with its own challenges. As your ancestors become more confident in their protective capabilities, they're also becoming more ambitious in their goals. They're no longer content to simply survive in their current territory. They're beginning to dream of expansion, of exploration, of pushing into environments that would have been unthinkable death traps just generations earlier. This ambition drives them to develop portable protection systems that can function effectively across diverse environments. Modular clothing that can be reconfigured for different weather conditions. Lightweight tools that maintain effectiveness while reducing carrying weight. Compact shelter systems that provide reliable protection without limiting mobility. They're creating the first truly adaptable protective technologies. The engineering challenges of portable protection force innovations that will have profound implications for human development. Weight optimization techniques that maximize protective capability while minimizing bulk. Durability improvements that ensure equipment survives extended travel and rough handling. Versatility designs that allow single items to serve multiple protective functions, but perhaps most importantly, they're developing rapid deployment capabilities. Protection systems that can be quickly assembled when threats emerge unexpectedly. Emergency procedures that transform vulnerable traveling groups into defensible units within minutes. Instant shelter techniques that provide immediate protection from sudden weather changes or predator encounters. These rapid response capabilities require unprecedented coordination and training. Every group member must understand their role in emergency protection procedures. Equipment must be organized for instant access during crisis situations. Communication systems must enable instant coordination without alerting potential threats to the group's location. The training programs developing around these emergency procedures create humanity's first standardized response protocols. Not rigid rules that must be followed blindly, but flexible frameworks that can be adapted to different situations while maintaining essential protective principles. Everyone learns the basic procedures, but specialists develop advanced capabilities that enhance group defensive effectiveness. Mock emergency exercises become regular training activities that prepare groups for real crisis situations. Simulated predator attacks that test rapid deployment procedures without actual danger. Weather emergency drills that practice shelter construction under time pressure. Equipment failure scenarios that develop improvisation skills and backup system capabilities. These exercises reveal something remarkable about human learning capacity. Your ancestors aren't just memorizing procedures through repetition. They're understanding the underlying principles that make protective procedures effective. This deep comprehension allows them to adapt standard procedures to novel situations and improvise effective solutions when standard approaches prove inadequate. The development of improvisation skills becomes crucial as groups venture into unfamiliar territories where standard protective procedures may not apply. Desert environments that require different hydration and heat protection strategies. Mountain regions where altitude and cold present unique challenges. Coastal areas where water-related threats demand specialized knowledge and equipment. Each new environment teaches lessons that expand humanity's protective knowledge base. Discoveries about materials that work better in specific conditions. Techniques that prove more effective against particular types of threats. Strategies that enable successful adaptation to previously uninhabitable regions. This accumulated environmental knowledge becomes one of humanity's most valuable resources. Knowledge sharing between groups becomes increasingly important as environmental expertise grows more specialized. Desert specialists who understand heat management and water conservation. Mountain experts who have mastered cold weather survival and altitude adaptation. Coastal groups who have developed water-related protective technologies. Each community becomes a repository of specialized knowledge that benefits the entire human network. But this specialization creates new challenges for knowledge preservation and transmission. Environmental expertise that takes years to develop through direct experience. Specialized techniques that require specific materials and conditions for effective learning. Complex procedures that demand extensive practice to achieve competency. The knowledge base is growing faster than traditional transmission methods can handle. Innovation in education becomes necessary to address these knowledge transfer challenges. Intensive training programs that compress years of environmental experience into concentrated learning periods. Simulation techniques that allow safe practice of dangerous procedures. Standardized curricula that ensure consistent quality across different instructors and learning environments. Master-apprentice relationships become more formalized as the knowledge to be transmitted grows more complex and the consequences of poor training become more severe. Systematic skill development programs that progress from basic concepts to advanced techniques. Quality assessment procedures that verify competency before students are trusted with critical responsibilities. Continuing education requirements that keep specialists current with rapidly evolving knowledge. The emergence of professional standards creates humanities-first credentialing systems. Recognition procedures that identify individuals who have achieved mastery in specific protective specializations. Quality assurance protocols that maintain consistent performance levels across different practitioners. Peer review processes that prevent the propagation of ineffective or dangerous techniques. These professional systems create powerful incentives for excellence and continuous improvement. Specialists who develop superior techniques gain status and resources that support further innovation. Communities with better trained specialists enjoy enhanced survival rates and expanded territorial ranges. Groups that maintain higher professional standards attract the most talented individuals and form the strongest alliance networks. Competition between specialists drives rapid advancement in protective technologies and techniques. Master practitioners who develop signature innovations that distinguish their work from competitors. Training programs that compete to produce the most capable graduates. Professional communities that strive to maintain leadership in their specialized fields. But this competition remains balanced by cooperation, as all specialists face similar challenges that benefit from collaborative solutions. Complex protective problems that require multiple types of expertise. Resource limitations that make sharing more efficient than duplication. Common threats that unite specialists across different communities and specializations. Collaborative research projects become regular features of intergroup gatherings as specialists from different communities work together on challenges that exceed individual capabilities. Joint development efforts that combine different types of expertise and resources. Shared experimentation programs that distribute the risks and costs of testing new protective concepts. Collective knowledge building that accelerates advancement beyond what any individual community could achieve. The emergence of research methodologies creates systematic approaches to protective innovation that consistently generate useful results. Hypothesis formation techniques that identify the most promising avenues for investigation. Experimental design procedures that test specific concepts while controlling for confounding variables. Data analysis methods that extract maximum information from limited experimental opportunities. Documentation systems become increasingly important as research activities generate growing amounts of information that must be preserved and transmitted. Recording techniques that capture essential details about experimental procedures and results. Organization methods that make stored information readily accessible for future reference. Transmission protocols that ensure accurate transfer of research findings between communities and generations. But perhaps the most significant development during this period is the emergence of theoretical frameworks that explain why certain protective approaches work while others fail. Understanding of fundamental principles that govern effective protection across different environments and threat types. Predictive models that can anticipate the effectiveness of new protective concepts before expensive testing. design principles that guide innovation efforts toward the most promising solutions. These theoretical advances transform protective development from empirical trial and error to systematic engineering. Protective challenges can now be analyzed systematically to identify optimal solution approaches. New environments can be assessed theoretically to predict required protective adaptations. Innovation efforts can be focused on the most promising concepts rather than pursuing random experimentation. The integration of theory and practice creates powerful feedback loops that accelerate advancement in both areas. Theoretical insights that suggest new practical applications and improvements. Practical experience that tests and refines theoretical understanding. Collaborative relationships between theorists and practitioners that ensure developments remain relevant while pushing the boundaries of possibility. Educational curricula begin incorporating theoretical components alongside practical training, as specialists need to understand both why techniques work and how to apply them effectively. Conceptual frameworks that help students understand the principles underlying specific procedures. Analytical methods that enable systematic problem solving rather than rote procedure following. Design principles that support innovation and adaptation rather than simple replication. The psychological impact of theoretical understanding transforms how humans approach protective challenges. Confidence that comes from understanding why solutions work rather than simply knowing that they work. Analytical capabilities that enable systematic approach to novel problems. Creative capacity that generates innovative solutions by applying understood principles in new combinations. This intellectual confidence drives increasingly ambitious protective projects as humans realize that systematic understanding can overcome apparently insurmountable challenges. Complex, multi-stage protective systems that coordinate multiple defensive elements. Long-term infrastructure projects that create permanent protective advantages. Experimental programs that test the boundaries of protective possibility. The success of these ambitious projects validates the theoretical approach and encourages even more sophisticated undertakings. Proof that systematic analysis can solve complex protective problems. Evidence that collaborative effort can achieve goals beyond individual capabilities. Demonstration that human intelligence can master any protective challenge through persistent application of sound principles. Regional variations in theoretical development begin reflecting different environmental challenges and cultural approaches. Desert theorists who focus on heat management and resource conservation principles. Mountain philosophers who specialize in cold weather adaptation and altitude effects. Forest thinkers who develop theories about limited visibility environments and biological threat management. But these regional theoretical traditions remain connected through trade networks and cultural exchange systems that prevent intellectual isolation, cross-pollination between different theoretical approaches that generates hybrid solutions. Collaborative research programs that test theoretical concepts across multiple environments. Standardization efforts that identify universal principles that apply regardless of specific conditions. The competitive aspects of theoretical development drive rapid advancement, as different communities strive to develop superior understanding and more effective solutions. Theoretical insights that provide practical advantages in protective capability. Predictive models that enable better anticipation of threats and challenges. Innovation frameworks that generate superior protective technologies. But cooperation remains essential as theoretical challenges often exceed the capabilities of individual communities. Complex problems that require multiple types of expertise and resources. Fundamental research that benefits all human communities, regardless of specific environmental challenges. Knowledge preservation that protects intellectual achievements from loss during disasters or conflicts. As the morning progresses and your group prepares for another day of travel and exploration, you're witnessing the culmination of humanity's transformation from vulnerable prey animals to master engineers of protection. They've developed Not just better tools and techniques, but better ways of thinking about protection that enable continuous adaptation to any challenge. The landscape around them is no longer an alien environment filled with insurmountable threats. It's become a design space where protective challenges can be systematically analysed and solved. Every rock formation is evaluated for its shelter potential. Every water source is assessed for its defensive implications. Every travel route is analysed for its risk-benefit characteristics. This analytical approach to environmental interaction marks the beginning of humanity's long journey toward mastering the planet. Your ancestors are learning to see the world not as something that happens to them, but as something they can understand, predict, and systematically improve. They're developing the intellectual tools that will eventually enable the construction of cities, the development of agriculture, and the exploration of other worlds. But more importantly, they're developing the mindset that refuses to accept limitations as permanent. Every protective challenge becomes a problem to be solved, rather than a barrier to be endured. Every environmental obstacle becomes an opportunity to develop new capabilities. Every threat becomes a catalyst for innovation that leaves humans stronger and more capable than before. The fire from last night has been carefully banked and prepared for transport, but the intellectual fire it represents burns brighter than ever. Your ancestors have discovered something more powerful than any physical tool or technique. They've learned how to think systematically about protection, and that changes everything. As they shoulder their increasingly sophisticated equipment and begin another day's journey, they carry with them the seeds of every future human achievement. The theoretical frameworks that will guide protective development for millennia. The collaborative methods that will enable increasingly complex projects. The analytical mindset that will eventually unlock the secrets of the universe itself. From those first tentative moments when a naked, vulnerable primate-draped animal hide across their shoulders to protect against thorns, we've witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. Not just clothing, but the very idea that humans don't have to accept the world as they find it. Every thread in your shirt, every zipper on your jacket, every waterproof coating on your gear traces its lineage back to those desperate, brilliant ancestors who refused to let a hostile world defeat them. They didn't just survive. They transformed survival itself into an art form. Tonight, when you pull on your pajamas or adjust your thermostat, remember that you're the inheritors of humanity's greatest revolution. The moment we stopped being victims of our environment and started becoming its masters. Sweet dreams knowing you're wrapped in 3 million years of human ingenuity. Sweet dreams knowing you're wrapped in 3 million years of human ingenuity.